What makes Chicago a great city is much more than stone and steel. It's the people. The foundation for the Great Migration that brought African Americans to Chicago wasn't built on stone and steel. It was made from paper and ink. It was a newspaper called the Chicago Defender.
Don't you let nobody turn you around. Don't let him turn you around. Don't let him turn you around.
The Defender has contributed to making Chicago a world-class city for a long time. We're in our 104th year. The population, the African-American population, was pretty much predominantly in the southern states in the early part of the 20th century and certainly the 19th century. And through the efforts of the Defender's distribution, as many people already know, the Pullman Porters were the key to getting the paper distributed down south, and this kind of precipitated the influx of African Americans into Chicago, the Great Migration, as we call it, to the Midwest back in the early 1900s. And the 1930s and 40s, it just grew and grew and grew. And that all contributed to making Chicago a great city, because it really provided a lot more diversity in the city. Chicago is known as a city of diversity. Many ethnic groups from all over the world migrated to Chicago during the early part of the century.
I think the catalyst for the Great Migration had a lot to do with African Americans wanting a better life. They knew what it was like in the South. They knew that the jobs weren't there, sharecropping, and they weren't being treated fairly by the landowners. The Chicago Defender was important in that it disseminated information. People wrote letters and said, come to Chicago, this is good. They would write letters, can we get jobs up there? That was the internet of that time. So they came to Chicago.
Bronzeville, as it's now called, was called the Black Belt during the period of the first Great Migration, which takes place from the beginning of World War I, about 1915, and up to about 1945 or 50. Because we were confined by understanding and agreement, and to some extent, legalities. Robert Abbott, who was the founder of the Chicago Defender, coined it the Black Belt. In that limited territory, there were packed huge numbers of people. To give an example, our population density compared to similar white densities outside of the Black Belt. Whites outside were 21,000 people per square mile. In the Black Belt, we were 84,000 per square mile. Same amount of space, 4 times as many people.
You have a lot of firsts that came from here that impacted that profession, that started whatever their profession was. They were the first. You have, as our mayor is talking about the Olympics, we certainly had a first Olympic winner here in Chicago, Ralph Metcalf. You had Ida B. Wells. You had Bessie Coleman, so African-American pilot. Chicago is full of movers and shakers. And they know when to move and when to shake.
Blacks, because of the segregation, created what we call parallel institutions. Parallel economic institutions, parallel cultural and social institutions.
You had the great clubs. You had the Parkway Ballroom. You had the Grand Terrace. You had places like the Rum Bookie. You had the Regal Theater. Then you had your clubs like Jerry's Palm Tavern, where all of the entertainers would come. So these musicians had a place to perform. Chicago's Bronzeville was like Harlem in New York. You had artists, white artists, band leaders who would come here to jam and listen to the black artists like King Oliver, you know, and work with them. Louis Armstrong was here, Lionel Hampton. They all got their start here, and they all contributed to what the music industry was then and how Chicago is perceived now. The musicians and artists that came through Chicago, through the Bronzeville community, not only from the time of the Great Migration, but even on into the 40s and 50s, have impacted the world of music. People like Nat King Cole, Gene Ammons.
Jazz, blues, gospel, all that music was created in the old Black Belt. There was a man by the name of Thomas Dorsey, who had been a musician as a jazz and a blues and the spirituals. He combined all of those and created a new form called gospel.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand.
You have Mahalia Jackson.
For you see,
You have the great Albertina Walker. The musicians that came from Bronzeville have, how do I say it? Their music and their artistry is in the annals of great American music and great American artists.
Now that same old enemy tried to destroy me, firing darts, Lord, Lordy, I could not see.
I doubt seriously whether there's hardly any other city where we could have had the Michael Jordans, the Oprah Winfreys, and now the President of the United States without the encouragement of the successful black population and support of people in the Brownsville area. They stopped here first.
Don't you let